We just had a very unusual storm caused catastrophic flooding in Texas here in the U.S., followed by another one in South Carolina, or the Carolinas in general, and in China and other areas. There's just been crazy, extreme, bizarre weather all around the planet. But what's behind it? Was weather modification? What was it? Weather modification in Texas? Who really controls the weather? Is global warming to blame? What is really behind all this crazy and dangerous weather? Is it a conspiracy? Is it done on purpose? I'm going to deep dive into all these things, and my conclusions may surprise you. So, let me put the old glasses on because everything is in my notes. And one of the questions is are humans responsible for climate change? What's really going on? So firstly, to my notes, when analyzing if there was a weather modification in Texas, I'll tell you that my training and my degree is in meteorology. So I do know from a scientific perspective, a lot of you know me as a medium and a psychic, basically, but I draw on both intuition, spirit, as well as science to draw my conclusion with things, and I'm going to talk about both in this video. So I draw mostly from that, but also I have to give a shout out to geophysicist Stefan Burns, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, because he's provided a lot of useful information that really backs up my ideas, and he's far more knowledgeable with things like space weather and geology, as well as other sites that talk about space weather. So I've done a lot of research. Now I'm doing the video for you. So for this summer, I did predict that there would be a lot of flooding, a lot of water, a lot of wind, and a lot of severe weather. There will be more frequent floods, and certainly the summer's just getting started, but that's certainly verifying, basically. And this is, I get this from intuition, but there's also, again, the science and what I understand what's going on energetically, as well as geophysically, as well as through space weather, as well as through meteorology, so forth and so on. So anyway, I will take into account intuition, research, space weather, geology. Didn't I just say this? To determine if this was weather modification and if climate change is real and if weather can actually be weaponized. Interesting topics, right? So firstly, Tropical Storm Barry interacted with a mid-latitude weather system and stalled and wrung out tons of water in a very localized area that's known as Flood Valley. So it's not like floods don't happen there, but this was above and beyond. And flood warnings were issued. Some people say it was a little bit underwhelming or a little bit late, or flood watches were issued, I should say. And the rainfall estimates in the forecast from the National Weather Service and other weather media outlets was underwhelming. It underplayed how much rain actually fell, and people were caught off guard by that. Some are blaming the Donald Trump cuts, and whereas I do agree that cutting staff of essential personnel to keep us safe, like the National Weather Service, this could have easily happened whether or not they were fully staffed. So just be aware of that. This has happened before. It'll happen again. Forecasting weather, there's just not enough known for it to be 100% accurate. And things always have slipped through the cracks, and they always will until meteorologists start to understand more about the role of space weather, the role of geology, the role of the changing energy currents on the planet. And what else is in my notes here? And things of that nature, Earth cycles, and not to be underplayed, but we get our weather data in a grid system, so we have no idea of, we take our measurements at certain grids in the atmosphere, so we don't know what's going on in between those grids. So therefore, the computer models cannot be 100% accurate because the grid is still just that, a grid. We do not have a way of, shall we say, mapping the entire atmosphere, if that makes any sense. So weather forecasting will never be 100% accurate. Tragic forecasting errors will happen on occasion until they learn more about this stuff. And you also have to understand, if people are saying that they didn't get adequate warning or whatever, that there were flash flood watches out, and people should at least be cautious when that happened. But the warnings may have been a little bit late, but understand the nature of flash flood is just that. It happens in a flash, and very often there is no warning. So I think we understand that point. Yeah. So some are citing global warming as the cause to this and the recent spike of these intense weather events. And whereas global warming does increase the strength and frequency of severe events, you can't blame global warming for every singular event. You can understand a relationship with the trends of the weather, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this one event was directly caused by global warming. Now, through intuition and training, I can tell you that global warming is real. It's really happening. And there is a part of human activity that is, I won't say responsible for it, but influences it in this very, very narrow timeline of Earth's history. So I don't want to take this out of proportion, because the Earth will heal itself once humans figure it out and balance our energy output with the needs of our atmosphere and our Earth in order to balance the weather and to calm things down. So it is. The Earth is basically, it balances the energy. If the temperature profile is not supporting her life the way she'd like, she'll try to counterbalance it. So understand that everything's conscious. We're conscious. The Earth is conscious. All part of Spirit, Source, or God, right? So anyway, water. So again, timeline very narrow in the Earth's history of human activity. So it's a factor, but maybe not exactly how we're being told it is, or how it's being politicized. But modern practices like use of fossil fuels adds carbon dioxide to add water, and actually converts potential energy to kinetic energy and actually heats the atmosphere that way. So it adds energy into the system. It adds heat into the system. That and other things that we do as modern humans. I'm going to dive into that in a little bit. But these things alone do not explain the recent spike of severe weather and stronger storms. So, and that can only be explained by weather modification beyond atmospheric and oceanic heating. But it may not be what you think. So hang in there for a second. I've got more to explain. Can weather be modified? Can storms be artificially steered? That's a good question. The answer is yes. They absolutely can be. And in fact, steering storms artificially, involves very basic meteorology if you have the energy source to do it. Whether the technology exists to drive large-scale weather systems is debatable, but it's absolutely possible. So that's the point I want to make there. We're seeing pages and pages on the government websites about different experiments and things that are carried out in weather modification. A lot of it involves silver iodide to seed clouds. It's speculative, but it's more on the spectrum of provable now that there's, there is geoengineering, that we know, but there's also aerosol chemical spraying or chemtrails, at least most likely, that could be used to modify the weather to cool the sun or the atmosphere or vice versa or whatever. There's also something known as HAARP technology, HAARP. I'll never remember what that stands for, but these have the ability to affect the ionosphere to create artificial auroras, which means they have to have a very high output of energy in order to do that, because what creates auroras naturally? It's the sun. It's solar storms, basically, high solar winds, high ionization that does that. So we also have to weigh in that, according to sources, a lot of large weather disasters and fires seem to strike areas slated to be rebuilt with smart cities and stuff like that. But where some conspiracies verify, and this is important, some conspiracies are real, they verify. Like I knew what the 10-4 behind the recent pandemic and the systems of control around that, basically, and that became a fact. A lot of that became a fact. But we have to understand that a lot of these conspiracy theories, to me, they're wild, they're off the charts, and probably introduced by those that want to control things by giving people false conspiracy theories as smokescreens to further anger, confuse, to further separate people from their own heart and their own power, to invoke fear, to invoke panic, so that those systems of control can further level more control on society, basically. So important that we know that. So on that note, how do you steer a storm? That's a good question, right? Since we said it's basic meteorology. Well, what happens in the upper troposphere to the lowest ranges of the stratosphere, that's where the jet stream resides. That's what drives surface tropospheric weather systems, basically. So you can change the temperature profile in that region in the upper troposphere into the stratosphere. And by changing the temperature profile, you change the pressure, and then you change the upper air patterns, and the upper air patterns are what drive the surface systems. So if you have a large enough output of energy, you can warm a portion of the upper atmosphere, create a ridge, which creates corresponding troughs, which steer low pressure systems in the lower atmosphere, basically. So it's absolutely possible. And theoretically, that can be done maybe through HARP. I personally don't know enough about the technology to speak intelligently on it. It's just a feeling and the limited information that I do know. And I know that there's other things out there that can also create energy outputs that may not be talked about as much. So it's possible. And it would seem plausible that steering storms, just like changing their intensity, is being done, at least in an experimental level. Again, no proof, but it would be plausible, and I believe that it's happening. I'll put it that way. However, all these events can be explained by nature. And if it was just one or two, then we could write it off to freak weather events. They always have happened. They always will happen. But it's the sheer numbers that raises eyebrows, basically, and the repetitiveness. So anyways, like Maryland had two 1,000-year floods in the space of 5 years. I forgot the name of that town. Ellicottville, was it? Or two of them in 5 years, basically. And that's been the trend. So whether we know it or not, and this is another interesting point, whether we know it or not, whether it's by design or whatever, humans are modifying the weather, and it's not just greenhouse gases. And a lot of this really is not discussed, but I think as time goes on, it will be more talked about. So back to my notes, whether we know it or not, we are modifying the weather. And I now submit that weather modification was at least a partial factor in this. Again, it may not have been purposeful, but was at least a partial factor, and other unusual events, but probably not what most people think. And here is why. Firstly, we burn a lot of fossil fuels on this planet, not just our cars, not just our factories, but think of what fossil fuel is. The fossil fuels, they were once what? Like vegetation, right? Or things on the earth. They absorbed the sun's energy, and then they stored the sun's energy. That's called potential energy in physics. When you harvest the fossil fuels from the earth, and then you burn them, you release that potential energy and create kinetic energy. And by that, you are literally heating the atmosphere. Now, one car alone, even a million cars may not do it significantly, but there's more than that going on. So there's a lot of that, and also it changes the the hydrocarbons, excuse me, into oxygen and water. I think it's 2 parts water, 1 part carbon dioxide, not oxygen. And carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, but water is a stronger greenhouse gas. That's why when it's a very humid night, even if it's clear, it doesn't cool off as quickly than when it's a dry night, right? In the summer, that's because water traps heat closer to the atmosphere. And because of what's been going on, as well as the natural warming or artificial warming, it's estimated, at least from what I've heard. Actually, I heard one place about 3.5%, but I've seen in other studies that I've looked at about 7% increase in water in the atmosphere. Water vapor. Water is a gas. And water vapor is a better electrical conductor. Therefore, it has more potential to transfer energy than the rest of the air, basically. So water vapor has more electrical conductivity than air itself. So it's going to conduct more electricity. We've been having more lightning, right, and more severe storms. Something to consider. So we hear, and it's politicized, all about CO2, this, that, and the other thing. We've got to do this, but there's other factors at play, and there's other greenhouse gases and other factors that don't get talked about. So through human, though not by human intervention, space weather affects weather extremes also by adding more energy into the system, basically. The last 2 or 3 years, we've been in solar maximum, more solar flares, more ionization of the upper atmosphere that translates into the lower atmosphere, and voila, we've got more energy to work with to create these superstorms and these events. Solar maximum, it's an 11-year cycle, so we're about 3 to 4 years every 11 years in the solar maximum. This one's about twice as strong as the last solar maximum, but at the same time, it's not by any means the strongest we've ever had. So that's something to think about also. Also, enhances the vibrational resonance of the atmosphere as well as within the Earth. So these solar flares, these coronal mass ejections from the flares, the filaments, the plasma filaments, the coronal holes, all of that, they affect the ionization and affect the energy on Earth, and they can add to the system. And also the geology plays a role. So when there's more geological activity, it affects the weather also. Plus, there's cycles that are not understood. And like I said earlier, meteorologists don't know enough about how space weather influences terrestrial weather, and it's not written into the computer programs like the Euro model, the American models that we rely on for our weather forecasting. It's just not in there. So there's more. What about cell towers, 5G especially? How about advanced Doppler radar? Our advanced Doppler radar picks up on storms, tornadoes, things that keep us safe, but it lays down a very low level of microwave and high radio wave frequency in the entire coverage area. I don't have a cell signal here, but Doppler radar does cover this. So there are microwaves. And then we have the 5G tower, especially because they're more efficient, but you need more power to make them run. So it's a higher output of microwaves, through the cell towers. And there's the Gwen towers, Wi-Fi single smart meter, all exists microwaves. And what do microwaves do? They excite the water. They increase the energy. That's how your food gets cooked in the microwave oven. It excites the water molecules and produces heat. So that's happening on a very low level, but a very real level in our atmosphere. And that, too, is contributing to a lot of the craziness. So we have more electrical potential. We have more heat. We have more energy in the system. And we have a mechanism, microwave energy, to energize the system, to create more movement, and to increase the potential for more severe weather events, more electricity. That's why lightning storms, it's not just your imagination. They have gotten stronger through the years. And the severity and the frequency of unusual weather events, it has gotten stronger. And these are just some of the things. There's actually more. And there's also the role of consciousness. We affect the weather. the Native Americans. I tell the story a lot about a teacher that told me how that they manifested rain, through their prayers, basically, and very often it worked, basically. And we know that through consciousness, we affect everything, including the weather, including the earth. So there's the role of that and what's called predictive programming, or the placebo effect. Like, in other words, if you tell enough people over and over again, the weather's getting more severe, it's getting worse, it's global warming, this, that, or the other thing, we believe it and we feed that into the collective fields, and that enhances the effects of these things and contributes to what's going on with the increase of severe weather, producing, strange, catastrophic events like what we just saw in Texas and the Carolinas, and Superstorm Sandy a few years back. That took an extremely unusual path, and it got a lot of people theorizing that it was intentionally steered in that area. It may have been, but I still think the lion's share of weather modification is really more about what's going on in modern civilization, including the things that I cited and a few things that I didn't or that I missed. So there are other factors. So anyway, where are we? So I always known it, but now quantum theory is starting to prove it. That's the role between consciousness and the weather, that how we collectively are modifying and creating our reality. So you see, we are modifying the weather and heating the atmosphere, but in ways that the legacy media and the politics is not disclosing. So there are other factors involved, but I think that you get the idea. So I'd have to say, based on just the sheer lack of specific evidence, I cannot proclaim that this or any other specific weather event is the result of intentional weather modification. But if there is a political or a financial motivation, follow the money, follow the flow of power, and it happens repeatedly, you do at least have to consider the possibility that there's something else at play here. So that's what I'm going to leave you with on that thought. But as you're understanding that, keep in mind that they're trying to confuse you. They're trying to confuse people so that they can continue their agendas. So just remember, all lines of communication are corrupt now. So check in with spirit, check in with your intuition and your heart. Do your own research and cross-reference. Don't rely on one side. Cross-reference and do that carefully before jumping into any conclusions. And on that note, that we have the power to help modify the weather consciously, as well as affect collective consciousness that can ease things like violence on the earth, things of that nature, the suffering and all that. We did on the 7-7 portal, we got together, we did a transmission, a vibrational or energetic transmission to raise our frequencies, to send a lot of light and positivity to the collective. If you want to get in on that, because it's not a factor of time or anything like that, anytime you do this process, you'll be joining our collective and helping the energies of the earth and helping the earth heal and to modify things. Try this video here, and over here we'll flash a video about the summer psychic forecast. Thank you. Love.